Hi there. Tonight we slip into the sun-baked streets of ancient Persia, where the air hums with the scent of saffron and the distant clink of blacksmiths' hammers. You're standing in the heart of the Achaemenid Empire, around 500 BCE, where towering palaces cast shadows over bustling markets. As a woman here, you're about to discover a world of rigid rules and quiet resilience and, spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this without a serious headache from all the social gymnastics. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not just anywhere, you're in Persepolis, the glittering capital where King Darius I holds court. The streets are alive with merchants haggling over silks from far-off lands. But as a woman, you're already feeling the weight of invisible boundaries. Persian society is a labyrinth of hierarchies, and gender sits at its core like a stubborn gatekeeper. You're either royal, elite, common, or enslaved. And each rung on this ladder comes with its own set of chains, some gilded, some iron. For women, the rules are etched in stone, or at least in the clay tablets scribes are scribbling on nearby. You can't own land, you can't speak in court, and your role is mostly to keep the household humming and the next generation coming. It's not all grim. There's beauty in the intricate braids you weave into your hair and the laughter of children playing in the courtyard. But the system isn't exactly cheering for you. Let's get one thing straight. Mainstream history tells us the Achaemenid Empire was a marvel of organization, with roads stretching from Susa to Sardis and a postal system that'd make modern couriers jealous. Women, though, were rarely the ones riding those roads or sending those messages. Your world is smaller, tethered to the home or the fields. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some women, especially in elite circles, could manage estates when their husbands were off conquering. Imagine you're one of these rare women, juggling clay tablets with tallies of grain while your husband's out dodging arrows. It's not freedom, but it's a sliver of power, like finding an extra date in your ration bowl. Historians still argue whether Persian women were more oppressed than their Greek neighbors across the sea. Some say the veil you're wearing, yes, that heavy, embroidered thing itching your neck symbolized seclusion, while others claim it gave you a kind of mysterious clout, letting you slip through public spaces unnoticed. Either way, you're not exactly strolling into the royal council to debate taxes. Your day starts at dawn, grinding barley or hauling water from the well, and it ends when the lamps flicker out. If you're lucky, you're in a wealthier household, where your biggest worry is keeping the servants from pilfering the saffron. If you're not, you're out in the fields, your hands calloused from spinning wool, wondering if the gods are even listening. Speaking of gods, Zoroastrianism shapes everything here, and it's not exactly handing out gold stars for gender equality. You're taught that Ahura Mazda, the wise creator, values order, and for women, that means sticking to your lane: marriage, motherhood, modesty. You might crack a joke to your sister about how the sacred fire in the temple burns brighter than your own ambitions, but you keep it quiet. The priests don't love sarcasm, and neither does your mother-in-law, who's probably watching you like a hawk. Oh, and here's a little chuckle for you. The Persians loved their wine, but good luck getting an invite to the men's banquets. You're more likely to be refilling their cups than sipping from one dot. As you walk through Persepolis, you notice the grand reliefs on the palace walls: kings and warriors, lions and bulls, but no women. It's as if you're invisible, yet you're everywhere, keeping this empire running. You pass a group of men debating the latest tribute from Egypt, their beards wagging like palm fronds in a storm. You'd love to chime in, maybe point out that the Egyptian linen they're praising was probably woven by women. Just like you, but you keep walking. Your voice doesn't carry here, not yet. For now, you're learning the rules, feeling the weight of this world, and maybe, just maybe, spotting a crack or two where you can carve out a bit of your own story. You're now gliding through the opulent halls of the royal palace in Susa, where the air smells of myrrh and the walls shimmer with glazed tiles. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're catching a rare glimpse of power, not yours, but theirs. The queens and noblewomen who move like shadows behind the throne. You're not one of them, but you're close enough to feel the weight of their world, where influence comes with a catch. The royal women, like Atissa, daughter of Cyrus the Great, aren't just decorative. They're players in a game of politics. Sharper than any dagger. You're here to see how they bend the rules, even if it's from the sidelines. Mainstream history tells us the Achaemenid kings relied on their mothers and wives for counsel. Atossa, for instance, was said to have shaped her son Xerxes' decisions. You picture her, draped in gold-embroidered robes, whispering strategies while scribes pretend not to listen. She's not ruling outright, but her words carry weight, like a pebble starting an avalanche. You're in awe, but also a bit jealous. Own life is more about grinding barley than swaying empires. Still, you notice how even Atossa's power is tethered. She's respected, but only as far as the king allows. Step too far, and the harem's gilded cage snaps shut. Here's a quirky tidbit. Royal women sometimes owned estates, managing them through stewards while their husbands were off warring. Imagine you're a fly on the wall as a queen's messenger delivers clay tablets listing olive yields or sheep counts. It's not exactly thrilling, but it's a kind of control you'll never taste. You smirk, thinking how your own estate is a cramped courtyard where you haggle with the neighbor over a stray goat. These women aren't free, but they've got a wider leash, enough to make you wonder what you'd do with that kind of leverage. Historians still argue whether these elite women were truly powerful or just pawns in royal marriages. Some say they were diplomatic glue, sealing alliances with foreign kings through betrothals, while others argue they were glorified prisoners, their every move watched by eunuchs and spies. You're leaning toward the prisoner side as you pass. The harem's guarded doors, where concubines and queens alike live under lock and key. You're not allowed inside, but you hear soft laughter and the pluck of a lyre. A reminder that even in confinement, life finds a way to hum along. As you linger near the palace gardens, you're struck by the contrast. Outside, you're dodging donkey carts and sweating under your veil, while here, fountains bubble and peacocks strut. The queens stroll these paths, their attendants fanning them with ostrich feathers. You'd love to flop onto one of those cushioned benches and sip pomegranate juice, but you're just a visitor in this world. A guard eyes you, so you keep moving, your sandals scuffing the polished stone. You crack a quiet joke to yourself. Maybe if you married a satrap, you'd get a garden view then again. You'd probably just be weeding it. The royal women's lives aren't all roses though. You learn they're expected to produce heirs, and fast. A queen who doesn't deliver a son risks fading into irrelevance, replaced by a younger rival. You wince, thinking of your own future marriage and motherhood loom like storm clouds. But at least you're not competing in a palace soap opera. The pressure here is relentless, and you're starting to see why even the most powerful women walk carefully. their smiles as calculated as a merchant's scales. You pause by a relief of the king receiving tribute, his queen nowhere in sight. It's a reminder of your place essential, but invisible. You think back to Persepolis' bustling streets, where you first felt the empire's pulse. Here, it's quieter, but the rules are just as tight. The queens might scheme and whisper, but they're still bound by the same system that keeps you fetching water at dawn. You're not sure whether to admire their cunning or pity their gilded traps. For now, you slip back into the shadows, carrying a spark of curiosity about what it takes to survive in this world of silk and steel. You're no longer in the perfumed halls of Susa's palace. Now, you're trudging through a dusty village on the empire's edge, where the sun bakes the earth and your hands ache from work. As a common woman in ancient Persia, you're not weaving political intrigues, weaving actual cloth, or kneading dough, or hauling water from a well that's half dry by noon. Life here is labor, dawn to dusk, and you're the backbone of this village, even if no one carves your name on a palace wall. You're about to feel the grind of daily survival, where every task is a reminder of your place. Mainstream history notes that the Achaemenid economy thrived on agriculture and trade, with common women like you playing a silent but massive role. You're out in the fields, planting barley or harvesting dates, your back bent under the weight of a basket. Or maybe you're at the loom, your fingers threading wool into cloth that'll end up in some noble's wardrobe. The empire's wealth flows through your hands, but you're lucky if you see a copper coin for your trouble. Your husband or father handles the market, leaving you to keep the household humming. Think of it as running a small empire, minus the glory. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women in rural Persia were known to make beer, a thick, barley-based brew that was more soup than party drink. You're stirring a clay pot of this stuff, hoping it ferments right so you can barter it for a new shawl. It's not glamorous, but it's a tiny piece of power, a way to stretch the household's resources. You chuckle to yourself, imagining a noblewoman like Atissa trying to stir this gupsheed, probably faint before the first bubble. Your life is tougher, but you're tougher too, with a knack for making do. Historians still argue whether common women had more freedom than their elite counterparts, despite the endless toil. Some say the lack of palace spies gave you room to bend rules, like sneaking a nap under a palm tree, while others point out you were still under your husband's thumb, with no legal voice. You're not sure who's right as you lug a water jar home, your arms screaming. Freedom feels like a distant dream when your day is a cycle of grind. Cook, weave, repeat. Still, there's a rhythm to it, like a song you can't stop humming. Even if it's not your favorite tune, you pause to wipe sweat from your brow, noticing the other women around you. There's a quiet camaraderie, here shared glances, a quick joke about the village elder's bad beard. You might tease your friend about her lumpy bread, but you'd share your last fig with her in a heartbeat. These moments are what keep you going, like the cool shade of the courtyard where you sit after sundown, spinning wool and swapping stories. It's not much, but it's yours, a small rebellion against the weight of expectation. The work never stops, though. You're back at the loom, your fingers nimble despite the calluses. The cloth you're making is sturdy, dyed with madder root you crushed yourself. You think of the royal women from Susa, draped in silks you'll never touch. Part of you envies them, but another part wouldn't trade your open sky for their gilded cages. At least out here, you can curse the stubborn donkey without a eunuch shushing you. You smirk, imagining what those palace ladies would say about your dusty sandals. probably something about rustic charm. As the sun dips, you head home. Your shadow long across the dirt path. Your house is modest, mud brick and cramped, but it's where you keep your world together. You're cooking lentils tonight, the same as yesterday, and you're already dreading tomorrow's chores. You think back to Persepolis' bustling streets and Susa's glittering halls, worlds away from this village. Yet you're part of the same empire, your labor stitching it together. You're not invisible here, not to the neighbors who rely on you, even if the king will never know your name. For now, you sit, eat, and let the day's weight settle, ready to do it all again tomorrow. You're standing in the courtyard of your family's mud brick home, the air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and nervous anticipation. As a young woman in ancient Persia, you're about to enter the high-stakes world of marriage, where your future isn't yours to choose. You're barely 16, but the whispers of betrothals are circling like vultures, and you're feeling the pressure of a society that sees you as a deal to be sealed. You're not weaving wool or hauling water today. You're navigating a marriage market where your worth is measured in dowries and alliances, and love is a luxury you can't afford. Mainstream history tells us that marriage in the empire was a cornerstone of social order, binding families and clans through carefully arranged unions. You're not marrying for romance, but for strategy. Your father is eyeing a neighbor with fertile orchards, or maybe a merchant with ties to the royal road. You're part of the bargain, expected to bring a dowry of woven cloth, jewelry, or even a few goats. In return, your husband's family provides security, or at least the promise of it. You're standing there, hands clasped, as your mother fusses over your veil, while men haggle over your fate in the next room. It's not exactly a fairy tale, unless the prince is a middle-aged widower with a bad temper. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Persian marriages included a temporary contract, a sort of trial period where you could be a wife for a set time, before things got permanent. You're imagining yourself in one of these, wondering if you could return to sender if your new husband snores like a camel. You stifle a giggle, picturing the look on your mother's face if you suggested it she'd probably faint into the lentil pot. These contracts were rare for common folk like you, but the idea of a marital escape hatch is oddly comforting as you face a lifetime commitment you didn't choose. Historians still argue whether Persian women had any say in their marriages or were just pawns in family deals. Some point to elite women, like royal daughters, who were betrothed to seal political alliances, suggesting you might have even less control as a commoner. Others argue that village girls like you could occasionally nudge the process, maybe by dropping hints about a kinder suitor. You're not feeling that power today, though, as your father calls you in to meet a prospective groom. He's got a decent beard and a herd of sheep, but his eyes don't meet yours, and you're already dreading the awkward silences of your future. You're trying to stay calm, but your stomach's churning like that barley beer you brewed last week. The marriage process is a maze of customs, gift exchanges, feasts, and endless negotiations over who pays for what. You're expected to be modest, obedient, and fertile, a checklist that feels heavier than the dowry chest your brothers are. Lugging in, you crack a quiet joke to your sister, whispering that maybe you'll hide in the grain cellar until everyone forgets the wedding. She shushes you, but her smirk says she's tempted to. Humor is your shield, even if it can't change the script. As the meeting unfolds, you're sizing up this stranger who might become your world. He's not cruel, you think, but he's not exactly reciting poetry either. You're hyper of the expectations piling up: produce sons, manage the household, honor the family. You think back to the village women, their hands rough from years of labor, and wonder if that's your future, too. The royal women of Susa, with their estate managers and political games, feel like a distant dream. Even the village weavers, with their small freedoms, seem luckier than you right now, trapped in this moment of becoming someone's wife. You step outside for a breath, the night air cool against your face. The stars are out, and you wonder if the gods are watching, or if they're too busy with kings and battles to care about your little life. You think of Persepolis, bustling markets, and Susa's glittering halls, places you'll never see. And now this village, where your story is being written by someone else's hand. Marriage is your next chapter, ready or not. And you're bracing yourself for a life where your voice is a whisper, but your strength will have to roar. You're lying on a woven mat in a dim mud brick room, the air heavy with the scent of sesame oil and fear. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're facing one of the most perilous chapters of your life, childbirth. Your body aches, and the village. Midwife is muttering prayers to Anahita, the goddess of fertility, as she prepares her herbs. You're not just fighting for yourself, but for the tiny life you're bringing into this harsh world. The stakes are high, and the odds are grim. Here is a gamble where the house rarely loses, but you're determined to beat it. Mainstream history tells us that childbirth in the Achaemenid Empire was a leading cause of death for women, with little medical knowledge to ease the process. You're surrounded by women, your mother, aunts, maybe a neighbor who's seen too many births end in tears. They're boiling water and burning incense, but there's no doctor, no sterile tools, just experience and hope. The midwife presses a damp cloth to your forehead, her hands steady but her eyes worried. You're trying to focus on her voice, but every contraction feels like a wave pulling you under. If you're lucky, you're in a wealthier household with access to better herbs. If not, you're relying on the same remedies your grandmother used, which might be more faith than science. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Persian midwives used a mix of pomegranate juice and crushed sesame seeds, believing it strengthened contractions. You're sipping this bitter concoction now, wincing at the taste and half joking to yourself that it's probably just a fancy way to ruin a good fruit. You'd laugh, but another pain hits, and you're gripping your sister's hand instead. The drink might do nothing, but the act of swallowing it gives you something to focus on, a small anchor in this storm. You think of that barley beer you brewed back in the village. Maybe you should have snuck a jug for courage. Historians still argue whether Persian women had better childbirth outcomes than their Mesopotamian or Egyptian neighbors. Some say that empire's wealth meant elite women could afford skilled midwives, while others point out that commoners like you were at the mercy of luck and local knowledge. You're definitely feeling the luck part as the hours drag on, the room growing stuffier, the midwives chanting about Anahita's blessings, but you're wondering if the goddess is on a break. You're not royal like Atissa, with a team of attendants. You're just you, sweating and praying in a village far from Persepolis grandeur. You're trying to stay strong, but fear creeps in like a thief. You've heard stories women who didn't make it, babies who never cried. Your mother's face is a mask of encouragement, but you see the lines of worry. You crack a weak joke, whispering that, if you survive, you're naming this kid after the midwife's smelliest herb. Your sister snorts, and for a moment the tension breaks, a tiny spark of light in the dark. These women around you are your lifeline, their hands and voices weaving a net to catch you if you fall. You're not alone, even if it feels like you're carrying the world. The process is grueling, and you're losing track of time. The midwife's working fast now, her hands moving with a rhythm you can't follow. You think back to the marriage talks, the dowry chests, the life you didn't choose. This moment feels like the culmination of it all. Society's demand that you produce the next generation, no matter the cost. You're angry, but there's no time for that. You're too busy surviving. You picture the fields you worked, the looms you wove, the empire you've helped sustain. You're part of something bigger, even if it's chewing you up right now as another contraction hits. You cling to a fleeting thought of Susa's queens, who faced this same ordeal in softer beds. You wonder if they felt this raw terror, or if their wealth cushioned the fear. You're not them, but you're no less fierce. The midwife's voice pulls you back, urging you to push. You're exhausted, but you dig deep, drawing on the same stubbornness that got you through those endless days of labor in the village. This is your fight, and you're not giving up, not yet, not ever. You're standing in the courtyard of your village home, the morning sun already warming the earth, but you're feeling anything but free. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're wrestling with the dress code that defines your every move. Layers of heavy fabric, veils that itch, and jewelry that's more status symbol than sparkle. You're adjusting a woolen shawl that's slipping off your shoulder, trying to look modest without suffocating in the heat. This isn't just about style. It's about signaling your place in a society that watches women like hawks. And you're learning fast that your clothes are both armor and cage. Mainstream history tells us that Persian women, especially in the Achaemenid period, wore long, flowing garments, often with veils, to signify modesty and social rank. You're draped in a tunic that reaches your ankles, cinched with a woven belt, and a veil that's supposed to cover your hair but keeps snagging on your earrings. If you're from a wealthier family, your fabrics might be dyed with indigo or saffron, but as a commoner, you're stuck with undyed wool, scratchy and smelling faintly of sheep. You're not just dressing for the day, you're dressing to avoid gossip, judgment, or worse, the attention of men who think an uncovered lock of hair is an invitation. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Persian women used lead-based cosmetics to whiten their faces, a trend you're thankfully dodging because, well, you'd rather not poison yourself for beauty. You're sticking to kohl for your eyes, smudged on with a shaky hand, and maybe a dab of ochre for your cheeks. You catch your reflection in a bronze mirror and joke to yourself that you look like a slightly fancier version of the goat herders. Wife. It's not much, but it's enough to pass muster with the neighbors, who'd whisper if your veil was an inch too short. Historians still argue whether the veil was a tool of oppression or a cultural norm with practical perks. Some say it restricted women, marking you as property, while others argue it offered protection, letting you move through markets without being ogled. You're not sure where you stand as you tug the fabric tighter, feeling like you're hiding. In plain sight, the veil's a shield, sure, but it's also a constant reminder that you're not trusted to be seen. You're sweating already. And it's not even noon. Freedom feels as distant as those royal gardens in Susa. You step into the street, careful to keep your eyes down, though you sneak glances at the world around you. Men stride past, their tunics, loose and breezy, and you can't help but envy their freedom to move without a second thought. You're not supposed to linger, but you pause by a stall selling clay beads, tempted to barter for a new bracelet. The vendor, an older woman, gives you a knowing nod. She gets it. The daily dance of looking respectable while trying to breathe. You crack a quiet joke, muttering that maybe you'll weave a veil out of palm leaves next time. She chuckles, and for a moment, you feel less alone. The weight of your clothes isn't just physical. Every layer carries expectations. Be pure, be obedient, be invisible. You think back to the childbirth you survived, the marriage you didn't. Choose the fields you've worked. Each moment has layered you in rules, just like this tunic and shawl. You're not in Persepolis' bustling markets or Susa's gilded halls, but you're carrying the same empire on your shoulders. The dress code is one more way to keep you in line, a daily reminder that your body isn't fully yours. You adjust your veil again, cursing under your breath when it slips, and keep walking. As you head home, you pass a group of girls playing with clay dolls, their hair uncovered, their laughter free. You smile, remembering when you were that age, before the veil and the rules closed in. You wonder if they'll feel this weight someday, or if they'll find a way to slip through the cracks. For now, you're focused on getting through the day, your sandals scuffing the dirt, your shawl a little looser than it should be. You're not rebelling, not yet, but you're starting to notice the edges of this system. And maybe, just maybe, you're dreaming of a day when you can wear what you want. You're sitting in the shade of a pomegranate tree, the hum of village life buzzing around you, but your mind is elsewhere. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're staring at a door that's firmly shut. Education. The boys in your village are off learning to read cuneiform or tally grain on clay tablets, while you're stuck spinning wool and dreaming of words you'll never write. Your world is rich with stories and songs, but literacy is a luxury reserved for men, and you're feeling the sting of being left out of the empire's knowledge. Mainstream history tells us that education in the Achaemenid Empire was highly valued, but mostly for elite men destined to be scribes, priests, or administrators. If you're a boy, you might be memorizing Zoroastrian hymns or practicing archery. If you're a girl, your school is the kitchen, the loom, or the fields. You're not illiterate because you're incapable, far from it, but because society sees no point in teaching you to read. Your role is to keep the hearth burning, not to decipher the king's edicts. You're listening to your brother recite a poem he learned, and you're quietly mouthing the words, wishing you could hold the tablet yourself. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some noble women, especially in royal circles, were taught to read, possibly to manage household accounts or correspond with stewards. You imagine one of those Susa queens, like Atissa, scribbling a letter with a reed stylus, while you're stuck memorizing recipes for lentil stew. You joke to yourself that maybe you'll carve your own epic into the mud by the well, call it the saga of the itchy veil. It's a fleeting fantasy, but it keeps you sane as you watch the boys march off to their lessons, their chatter fading into the dust. Historians still argue whether common women like you had any informal education, like oral storytelling or religious training. Some say you learned Zoroastrian prayers from your mother, passing down wisdom through songs, while others argue you were deliberately kept ignorant to maintain control. You're not sure which is true as you twist wool into thread, your fingers moving on autopilot. You know the myths of Anita and the sacred fire by heart, but you'd trade all that for a chance to read the merchant's ledger at the market. Knowledge feels like a locked chest, and you don't even have the key. You're not alone in this. The other women in the village share your quiet frustration, though no one says it out loud. You catch your friend's eye as she grinds barley, and you both roll your eyes when a boy stumbles over his cuneiform practice nearby. You whisper a joke, saying he's writing bread when he means brick, and her laugh is a small victory. These moments of defiance keep you going, like the time you memorized a trader's price list just by listening, proving to yourself you're sharper than they think. You're not schooled, but you're not stupid. The lack of education shapes your days in ways you can't escape. You're dependent on men to read contracts or relay news from the royal court, and it grates on you. You think back to the marriage negotiations, where you couldn't read the dowry agreement, and the childbirth, where you relied on the midwife's oral knowledge. Even the dress code, with its endless rules, feels tied to this. She'll kept in the dark, dressed in modesty, expected to obey without question. You're part of the empire's engine, but you're not allowed to see the map. As the sun climbs, you head to the well, your water jar balanced on your shoulder. You pass a scribe teaching a boy to scratch symbols into clay, and you linger just a moment, straining to catch a word. You think of Persepolis, grand reliefs, Susa's glittering queens, and your own village, where you're weaving the empire's future without a single written line. You're not giving up, though. You hum a song your mother taught you. Its verses a kind of school, and you promise yourself you'll teach your daughter more than you were given. For now, you keep walking, your mind as sharp as the stylus you'll never hold. You're kneeling in the flickering glow of a small fire altar, the scent of sandalwood and ash curling through the air. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're deep in the rhythm of Zoroastrian rituals, where every prayer and offering ties you to the divine order of Ahura Mazda. Your days are already packed with weaving, cooking, and dodging social rules, but religion adds another layer, a constant hum of duties that shape your role and remind you of your place. You're not just keeping the household running, you're keeping the cosmos in balance. Or so the priests say. Mainstream history tells us that Zoroastrianism was the heartbeat of the Achaemenid Empire, guiding everything from royal decrees to daily life. As a woman, you're expected to uphold its principles: truth, purity, and order through rituals like tending the sacred fire or purifying the home after childbirth. You're sprinkling water mixed with pomegranate leaves around the doorway. Now, a cleansing rite to ward off evil spirits. It's not optional. The village priest checks in, and your mother-in-law's hawk eyes miss nothing. You're tired, but you keep going, knowing this is one more way to prove your worth in a world that's always watching. Here's a quirky tidbit. Women were sometimes tasked with preparing halma, a sacred drink made from a mysterious plant, used in rituals to honor the gods. You're crushing stems with a mortar, your hands sticky, and you can't help but joke to yourself that this better make Ahura Mazda happy because it's ruining your only clean shawl. The drink's bitter, and you're glad you don't have to sip ithits for the men at the temple. Still, there's a quiet pride in knowing your work fuels the divine. Even if you're not invited to the main ceremony, historians still argue whether Zoroastrianism empowered women or boxed them in further. Some say rituals gave you a spiritual role, connecting you to the divine in ways men couldn't, while others argue it just piled on more unpaid labor, tying you to the home. You're feeling the labor part as you scrub the altar's base, your knees sore from the stone floor. The prayers you chant are beautiful, but they're also a script you didn't write, another rule to follow. You're not sure if you're closer to the gods or just closer to exhaustion, but you keep chanting, your voice blending with the crackle of the fire. You glance at the other women nearby, their heads bowed as they offer barley to the flames. There's a rhythm to this, a shared pulse that feels like the village weaving you worked on or the childbirth you survived. You whisper a joke to your cousin, saying the fire's burning brighter than your patience with these rituals. She stifles, a laugh, and the priest shoots you a look, but you're used to that by now. These small rebellions, quiet giggles, a slightly off-key chanter, how you carve out space in a system that demands your devotion without asking your opinion. The rituals aren't just spiritual, they're social. You're judged on how well you perform them, from the precision of your offerings to the modesty of your veil while praying. You think back to the dress code, how it wrapped you in expectations, and the marriage market, where your piety was part of the dowry. Even education, or the lack of it, ties in. You've memorized these prayers by ear, not by reading sacred texts. You're part of the empire's spiritual fabric, but you're stitching it with borrowed needles, following patterns set by men. As the ceremony winds down, you stand, brushing ash from your tunic. The fire's embers glow, and you feel a flicker of connection, not just to the gods, but to the women before you, who did this same work under the same stars. You think of Susa's queens, who probably had servants for this, and Persepolis, markets where you first felt the empire's weight. Here, in this quiet village, you're carrying that weight too, one prayer at a time. You're not sure if it's faith or duty driving you, but you're still here, tending the fire, keeping the world turning. You're standing in a dusty square, the sun high and unforgiving, as you face a circle of stern-faced men in long robes. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're in the shadow of the legal system, a place where your voice is barely a whisper. You're not here by choice, maybe a dispute over your dowry or a neighbor's accusation about a missing goat, but you're quickly learning that the courts are a man's world, and you're navigating it with your hands tied. The air smells of dry earth and tension, and you're bracing yourself for a system that sees you as less than equal. Mainstream history tells us that the Achaemenid legal system was sophisticated for its time, with royal judges and local magistrates enforcing laws across the empire. But for women, justice was a steep climb. You can't testify on your own behalf. Your husband, father, or even a male cousin speaks for you. You're standing there, your veil pulled tight, as your brother argues your case, but he's mangling the details, and you're biting your tongue to keep quiet. The judge, a bearded official with a clay tablet, barely glances your way. Your fate hinges on men's words, and you're feeling like a bystander in your own life. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some cases, women could act as guarantors for small loans, a rare legal loophole that let you sign a contract, well, sort of, since a man still had to vouch for you. You're imagining yourself trying this, picturing the scribe's raised eyebrow as you offer your woven shawl as collateral. You joke to yourself that you'd probably end up owing the court a herd of goats just for trying. It's a faint glimmer of agency, but it's not helping you now. As the judge drones on about laws you've never been taught, historians still argue whether Persian women were completely powerless in court or had subtle ways to influence outcomes. Some say elite women could pull strings through male proxies, while others argue commoners, like you, were at the mercy of a patriarchal system. You're definitely feeling the mercy part as the men debate, their voices drowning out the truth. You think of the royal women in Susa, who might sway a judge with a well-placed whisper. But here in the village, you're just another face in the crowd, hoping for a fair shake. You shift your weight, your sandals scuffing the dirt, and try to catch your brother's eye. He's doing his best, but he's no orator, and you're tempted to blurt out the real story, how the neighbor's goat wandered off, not stolen. You don't, though. Speaking out could make things worse, branding you as defiant. You crack A quiet joke in your head, picturing yourself as a courtroom hero, waving a tablet like a sword. Your sister, standing nearby, catches your smirk and raises an eyebrow, and you both share a silent moment of defiance. It's not much, but it keeps you grounded. The legal system's bias isn't just about who speaks, it's about who's valued. Men can own property, divorce, or demand justice. You can't. You think back to the marriage market, where your future was bartered, and the childbirth that nearly broke you, all part of a society that expects your labor but not your opinion. Even the Zoroastrian rituals you perform, with their chants for order, feel like they're propping up this same system. You're essential to the empire, your weaving, your children, your prayers, but in this square, you're invisible, a problem to be solved by someone else. As the judge scribbles his ruling, you brace for the outcome. You're not optimistic, but you're not broken either. You think of the village women, their shared glances and quiet strength, and the fields you've worked, where no one questions your worth. You're not in Persepolis' grand courts or Susa's gilded halls, but you're still here, standing tall despite the odds. The men may hold the tablets, but you're carrying the weight of their world, and you're starting to wonder if there's a way to tip the scales, even just a little. You're hovering at the edge of a bustling market square, the air thick with the scent of cumin and sweat, but you're not here to shop. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're an outsider in this male-dominated hub of trade, where merchants shout prices and camels snort under heavy loads. Your place is at home, or so they say, but you're here anyway, clutching a basket of woven cloth to barter for oil or grain. The market is the empire's pulse, but you're only allowed to skim its edges, and you're feeling the sting of being kept at arm's length from its power. Mainstream history tells us that the Achaemenid Empire's markets were economic marvels, linking India to Egypt through trade routes like the Royal Road. Merchants, scribes, and caravan leaders ran the show, haggling over silk, spices, and silver. You, as a woman, can't set up a stall or negotiate a deal directly. If you're lucky, your husband or brother brings your goods to market, but they pocket the profits. You're standing there, watching a trader weigh your cloth, knowing he's lowballing you because you're not allowed to argue back. Your voice is silent, but your mind's screaming about the hours you spent at the loom. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women in Persian markets sold homemade goods, like that barley beer you brewed back in the village, through male intermediaries. You're picturing yourself slipping a jug to your cousin to sell, hoping he doesn't drink half of it first. You joke to yourself that maybe you'll start a secret beer empire, cornering the market one sneaky sip at a time. It's a daydream, but it lifts your spirits as you dodge a donkey cart, trying not to spill your basket. These small hustles are your rebellion, even if they're hidden behind a man's name. Historians still argue whether women's exclusion from markets was total or if some found ways to bend the rules. Some say elite women sent agents to trade on their behalf, while others argue commoners like you were stuck bartering in backyards. You're definitely feeling stuck as you haggle indirectly, your brother relaying your terms to the trader. You want to step in, point out the flawless weave of your cloth, but you'd draw stares, maybe trouble. The market's a man's stage, and you're barely a prop. Your work fueling the empire's wealth while you stay in the shadows. You catch a glimpse of another woman, older, slipping through the crowd with a bundle of herbs. She's probably doing what you were bartering on the sly, using a son or nephew as her mouthpiece. You exchange a quick nod, a silent acknowledgement of the game you're both playing. You whisper a joke to yourself, imagining a market run by women where you'd out-haggle these loudmouth traders in half the time. Your sister, lingering nearby, catches your grin and rolls her eyes. She knows you're plotting something, even if it's just in your head. The exclusion stings because the market isn't just about goods, it's about connection. News from Persepolis, gossip from Susa, even tales of far-off lands filter through these stalls, but you're cut off from the flow. You think back to the legal system where your voice didn't count, and the education you were denied, keeping you from reading the merchants' ledgers. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, with their focus on purity, seem to justify keeping you out of this chaotic, impure space. You're essential, your cloth, your beer, your labor, but you're not welcome to claim the spotlight as you hand over your cloth and take a small jar of oil in return. You feel the weight of another day, spent on the fringes. You think of the village women, their shared strength, and the childbirth you survived, proving you're tougher than the toughest trader. You're not in Susa's palaces or Persepolis grand bazaars, but you're here, navigating this market. With quiet cunning, you tuck the oil under your arm, adjust your veil, and slip back toward home. Already planning your next move, maybe a better deal, maybe a bolder step, maybe a way to make this empire hear you. You're sitting in the dim light of your village home, a bronze mirror propped against a clay pot as you smear coal around your eyes with a trembling finger. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're grappling with beauty standards that feel like a full-time job, painful, time-consuming, and non-negotiable. Your hair's pinned up, your skin's scrubbed raw, and you're trying to meet an ideal that's as much about status as it is about looks. The air smells of rosewater and anxiety, and you're wondering if all this effort is worth the approving nods from your neighbors. Mainstream history tells us that Persian women, especially in the Achaemenid Empire, faced intense pressure to appear polished, with elaborate hairstyles and cosmetics signaling wealth and virtue. You're not a queen, so you're not dripping in gold like a Tosa, but you're still expected to look presentable. That means braiding your hair into tight coils, slathering on ochre to redden your cheeks, and maybe risking a dab of that lead-based face whitener you wisely skipped. You're tugging at a pair of heavy earrings, wincing as they pinch, and wishing you could just wear your hair loose like the kids playing outside. But appearances matter, and in this village, they're a public report card on your respectability. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Persian women used henna not just for hair dye, but to paint intricate patterns on their hands, a practice you're trying now with a shaky stick of paste. You're aiming for swirls, but it looks more like a toddler's scribble. And you joke to yourself that you've invented the world's first abstract tattoo. You're hoping it'll impress your mother-in-law, who's got a knack for spotting every flaw. The henna's sticky, and you're already regretting the hours it'll take to dry. But it's one more way to signal you're a proper woman, even if it feels like painting a target on your hands. Historians still argue whether these beauty rituals were a form of self-expression, or just another chain. Some say they let women claim a bit of creativity in a rigid world, while others argue they were a trap, tying you to vanity and male approval. You're leaning toward the trap side as you pluck your eyebrows with a pair of bronze tweezers, each tug making you curse under your breath. You're not doing this for fun, it's for survival, to avoid the whispers that follow a woman who looks unkempt. You think of the market, where you couldn't haggle, and the courtroom, where you couldn't speak. This mirror feels like another place where you're judged, not heard. You glance at your sister, who's braiding her own hair nearby, and you both share a look that says, "Why are we doing this?" You whisper a joke, saying you should just shave your head and call it a new trend. She snickers, but you're half serious anything to skip the hours of pinning, dyeing, and primping. The other women in the village are in on this grind, too, swapping tips about rosewater rinses or coal that doesn't smudge. It's a kind of bond, but it's also a competition, and you're tired of the scoreboard. You'd rather be weaving, or even hauling water than playing this game of who looks most modest. The beauty standards tie into everything else. The Zoroastrian rituals you perform demand purity, and a pure woman is a polished one. The marriage market valued your appearance, and the dress code wrapped you in layers to prove your virtue. Even the lack of education keeps you from questioning these rules. You're following traditions you can't read about, just like you're following beauty tips passed down by word of mouth. You're part of the empire's image, a walking billboard for order and tradition. But you're starting to wonder who this is really for. As you finish, you catch your reflection again. You look the part, coal-lined eyes, henna-stained hands, hair pinned tight, but you feel like you're wearing a mask. You think of Susa's queens, with their armies of attendants and Persepolis markets, where you felt the empire's pulse. Here, in this quiet village, you're shaping yourself to fit its rules, one painful pluck at a time. You set the mirror down, adjust your veil, and step outside, ready to face the day's judgments, but carrying a spark of defiance that no amount of coal can hide. You're in the shadowed halls of a royal palace, not as a queen but as a concubine, your life a delicate balance of luxury and peril. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're one of many in the king's harem, draped in silk but tethered by invisible chains. The air hums with the scent of jasmine and whispered rivalries, and you're navigating a world where beauty is your currency and security is a dream. Every step feels like a dance on a knife's edge, and you're learning fast that survival here depends on cunning, not trust. Mainstream history tells us that Achaemenid kings kept sprawling harems, filled with concubines from across the empire, often daughters of vassal rulers or captives from conquered lands. You're not royalty like Atosa, but you're young, chosen for your looks or your family's connections. Your days are spent in the harem's lush quarters, where fountains trickle and servants hover, but you're not free. Your property, expected to please the king when summoned, and your value hinges on his fleeting attention. You're brushing your hair with an ivory comb, your stomach knotted, knowing a single misstep could send you to the margins of this gilded prison. Here's a quirky tidbit. Concubines sometimes doubled as entertainers, trained to sing or play, the lyre to charm the court. You're practicing a melody now, your fingers clumsy on the strings, and you joke to yourself that if the king doesn't like your song, maybe you'll serenade the palace cats instead. The humor keeps you steady, but the reality is, stark, you're competing with dozens of others, each vying for a moment of favor that might secure a better life, or at least a safer one. You're not sure if you're a musician or a pawn, but you keep plucking the strings. Historians still argue whether concubines had any real influence or were merely ornamental. Some say a favored concubine could sway the king's ear like a backchannel diplomat, while others argue you're powerless, your life dictated by royal whims. You're feeling the powerless side as you overhear to other women plotting to catch the king's eye at tonight's banquet. You want no part of their schemes, but you can't ignore the game you're in it, like it or not. You think of the village you left, where you wove cloth and bartered in the market shadows. That life was hard, But at least you weren't a prize to be won. You share a glance with another concubine, a quiet girl from a distant satrapy, her eyes as wary as yours. You whisper a joke, saying you should both escape and start a lyre band on the royal road. She smiles, but its fleeting trust is scarce here, where every woman is a rival. Still, these small connections keep you human, like the shared laughter with village women or the sister who helped you survive childbirth. You're far from that world now, but you carry its strength, even as you adjust your gold bangles and prepare for another night of uncertainty. The harem's rules echo everything you've faced, the beauty standards that pinched your ears with. Heavy earrings are here, amplified your face is painted, your hair oiled, your every move scrutinized. The legal system that silenced you in court is mirrored in the harem's hierarchy, where the king's word is law. Even the rituals you once performed feel distant, replaced by new duties to pray for the king's health, as if your old gods don't matter. You're part of the empire's grandeur, a living ornament, but you're also its prisoner. Your life a thread in someone else's tapestry as evening falls. You're called to the banquet hall, your heart pounding under your embroidered robe. You think of Susa's queens, who wielded power you'll never touch, and Persepolis markets, where you once felt the empire's pulse. Here, your world is smaller, a maze of silk and suspicion. You're not sure if you'll be noticed tonight or fade into the crowd, but you're ready to play your part, hiding your fear behind a practiced smile. You're a concubine, a survivor, and somewhere deep inside, you're still the woman who wove her own story, even if no one else sees it. You're standing alone in the dim courtyard of your village home, the night air cool against your skin as the weight of widowhood settles like dust. As a woman in ancient Persia, you've just lost your husband to illness, war, or the gods. Woman, now you're staring down a future that's as uncertain as a desert storm. The village hums with its usual rhythm, but you're unmoored, no longer a wife, yet not free. You're clutching a worn shawl, the one you wove during happier days, and wondering how to survive in a world that barely sees you anymore. Mainstream history tells us that widows in the Achaemenid Empire faced grim prospects, especially if they were commoners like you. Without a husband, you've lost your social anchor, your provider, your voice in the market, your shield in the legal system. If you have sons, they might support you, but they're young, and the fields won't plow themselves. You're expected to remarry quickly, often to a brother-in-law, to keep the family's land intact. You're not thrilled about the idea, picturing your late husband's grumpy brother who smells like old lentils. You're on your own for now, scraping by on what's left of the household stores, and the neighbor's pity is already wearing thin. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some widows in Persia took up small trades, like selling homemade incense or mending clothes, to eke out a living. You're considering this, eyeing a basket of dried herbs you could bundle for the market. You joke to yourself that you'll call it widow's glow incense, guaranteed to mask the scent of despair. It's a faint hope, but it's something to cling to as you face the reality of empty grain jars and a roof that leaks. You're not sure if you're more scared or stubborn, but you're leaning toward stubborn, the same grit that got you through childbirth and market haggling. Historians still argue whether widows had any real agency or were just victims of a patriarchal system. Some say elite widows, like royal women, could inherit estates and wield influence, while others argue commoners like you were pushed to the margins, dependent on charity or remarriage. You're definitely feeling the margins as you tally your resources: a few goats, some wool, and a loom that's seen better days. You think of the harem in Susa, where concubines at least had silk to cushion their uncertainty. But here, you're bartering with nothing but your wits and a stubborn refusal to break. You catch a neighbor's glance across the courtyard, her eyes soft but cautious. She's a widow too, and you share a nod, a silent pact of survival. You whisper a joke to yourself, imagining you and her starting a widow's club, swapping tips on dodging creepy suitors. It's a fleeting laugh, but it steadies you, like the camaraderie of village women weaving or praying by the fire altar. You're not alone, even if the world feels like it's turned its back. These connections, fragile as they are what keep you moving forward. One cautious step at a time. Widowhood ties into everything you've faced. The legal system that silenced you now offers no protection. Your husband's land goes to his male kin, not you. The market, where you bartered through proxies, is even harder to navigate without a man's name. Even the beauty standards, with their endless primping, feel pointless now. Who are you dressing for? You think back to the Zoroastrian rituals, where you prayed for order, but order seems to mean keeping women like you in check. You're still part of the empire, but your role's been erased, like a tablet smoothed over for a new inscription. As you sit by the loom, threading wool by moonlight, you feel the weight of this new chapter. You think of Persepolis' bustling streets, Susa's gilded queens, and your own village, where you've poured your strength into every task. You're not a concubine or a queen, but you're still here, weaving a life from scraps. You don't know if you'll remarry, sell incense, or beg for scraps, but you know you'll fight for every dawn. You tuck the shawl around you, it's familiar. Softness, a reminder of who you've been, and who you'll have to become. You're standing in the dusty corner of your village home, staring at a patch of land beyond the courtyard that's as out of reach as the stars. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're grappling with the bitter truth about property rights, rather, the lack of them. You've worked this land, planting barley and tending goats, but now, as a widow, you're learning it was never yours to claim. The air smells of dry earth and disappointment, and you're piecing together a future where the ground beneath your feet belongs to someone else's name, mainstream. History tells us that in the Achaemenid Empire, land ownership was a male privilege, tightly controlled to keep wealth and power in men's hands. You're not surprised, but it stings. Your late husband's fields, the ones you both sweated over, now pass to his brother or a distant cousin, as if your years of labor were just a favor. You can stay, maybe, if you're lucky, but only as a tenant in your own home, scraping by on what the new owner allows. You're clutching a clay jar of grain, your hands calloused from years of work, and wondering how the empire can thrive on your back while denying you a stake in it. Here's a quirky tidbit. In rare cases, elite women, like royal widows, could manage estates, though the title stayed with a male heir. You're picturing yourself as one of those Susa queens, signing off on olive harvests with a flourish, and you joke to yourself that your big estate is this crumbling courtyard, complete with a VIP goat. The thought makes you smirk, but it's a hollow laugh. Your reality is a loom, a few jars, and no legal claim to the land you've nurtured. You're not managing anything but your own survival, and even that's a stretch. Historians still argue whether common women like you ever slipped through the cracks to hold property in practice, if not in name. Some say village women, occasionally, controlled small plots through informal deals, while others insist the system locked you out completely. You're feeling the lock as you watch your brother-in-law survey the fields, his eyes already counting profits. You want to shout that you planted those barley stalks, but you know it won't change the tablet he's holding, etched with his name, not yours. You think of the harem, where concubines at least had silk to soften their powerlessness, but here, you're left with dirt and determination. You catch a neighbor's glance as she hauls water nearby. Her own husband gone years ago. She nods, and you share a silent understanding. Widows stick together, even if the law doesn't. You whisper a joke, saying you'll both conquer the empire by selling goat dung as fertilizer. Her chuckle is a lifeline, like the shared laughs. With village women weaving or praying, these bonds are your real estate, the only thing no one can take. You're not giving up, but you're tired. And the weight of this injustice feels heavier than the water jars you've carried all your life. The property mirage ties into everything. The legal system that silenced you in court now ensures you can't inherit. The market where you bartered your cloth was never a place for you to build wealth. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, with their chants for order, seem to bless this system. That keeps you landless. You think back to the marriage market, where you were a dowry piece, and the childbirth that bound you to this village. You've given everything to this empire, your labor, your children, your prayers, but it's handed you nothing but a borrowed patch of earth. As you set the grain jar down, you feel a spark of defiance. You think of Persepolis' bustling markets, Susa's glittering queens, and your own village, where you've poured your heart into every seed. You're not a landowner, but you're a survivor, and you'll find a way, maybe through bartering, maybe through stubbornness. You adjust your shawl, the one you wove in better days, and step back into the courtyard. The land may not be yours, but your will is, and that's a foundation no one can take. You're weaving in the shade of your village courtyard. The loom's steady clack a backdrop to the chatter swirling around you. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're caught in the web of social gossip, where every word is a thread that can bind or unravel your reputation. The air carries the scent of baking bread and whispered judgments, and you're learning that a woman's honor is as fragile as the clay pots stacked nearby. One wrong step, loose veil, a laugh to loudened the village tongues start wagging, policing you with sharper eyes than any royal guard. Mainstream history tells us that Achaemenid society prized social order, and for women that meant staying above reproach. Gossip wasn't just idle talk. It was a tool to enforce modesty and obedience. You're careful now, keeping your veil pinned and your voice low, but you can't escape the whispers. Maybe it's about your widowhood, how you're not remarrying fast enough, or that time you bartered too boldly at the market. You're sitting here, threading wool, while your neighbor leans over, murmuring about another woman's scandalous visit to a male cousin. You nod, but inside, you're seething. This gossip mill grinds you all down, and you're tired of the churn. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women used gossip strategically, spreading rumors to settle scores or boost their family's status. You're tempted to try it, maybe hinting that your brother-in-law's prime barley field is half weeds. You joke to yourself that you'd be the village's gossip queen, ruling with a well-timed whisper. It's a fleeting fantasy, too busy surviving to play those games, and besides, you'd rather not add more fuel to this fire. You think of that henna you botched, how it sparked a week of smirks. You don't need more attention from the rumor patrol. Historians still argue whether gossip gave women a backdoor to power or just tightened their chains. Some say it let you shape the village narrative, while others argue it trapped you in a cycle of scrutiny where every move was judged. You're feeling the trap as you overhear a comment about your worn shell. Apparently, it's not widow appropriate. You want to snap back, but you bite your tongue, knowing a sharp reply would only feed the beast. You think of Susa's concubines, dodging harem intrigues, and realize gossip's just as vicious here. Even without the silk, you share a glance with your friend, who's kneading dough nearby. She rolls her eyes at the latest rumor, and you whisper a joke, saying you'll start a rumor that the village goats are plotting a coup. Her laugh is a quiet rebellion, like the shared smirks during rituals or market runs. These moments with other women's your sister, your neighbors are, your shield against the sting of whispers. You're not just a target, you're a survivor, weaving your way through this social maze with the same grit that got you through childbirth. And gossip connects to every layer of your life. The beauty standards that pinched your ears with earrings were about avoiding these whispers. The legal system that silenced you left you defenseless against slander. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, with their purity chants, fuel this obsession. With proper behavior, you think back to the marriage market, where gossip about your modesty set your worth, and the land you couldn't inherit, which sparked talk of your failure as a widow. You're part of this empire, but its rules make you a punching bag for every idle tongue. As you finish a row on the loom, you feel the weight of those unseen eyes. You think of Persepolis markets, Susa's palaces, and your village, where you fought to keep your head high. You're not perfect, your veil slips. Your jokes are too loud, but you're not bowing to this gossip mill. You tie off the thread, adjust your shawl, and keep weaving, knowing your strength is louder than their whispers, even if they'll never admit it. You're trudging along a dusty trail, the clatter of a distant army echoing through the hills, your arms heavy with a basket of bread and dried figs. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're one of the unseen shadows following the king's military campaigns, not as a soldier, but as a camp follower, cooking, mending, and keeping the troops fed. The air smells of sweat and smoke, and you're navigating a world of chaos and danger, where your work is vital, but your presence is barely acknowledged. You're exhausted, but you keep moving, knowing this is just another way the empire leans on you. Mainstream history tells us that Achaemenid armies were massive, with tens of thousands of soldiers supported by a sprawling network of camp followers, women, children, and laborers who handled the grunt work. You're one of these women, maybe a soldier's wife or a widow scraping by, stirring a pot of lentil stew over a makeshift fire. You're not wielding a spear, but you're hauling water, patching tunics, and baking flatbread under a scorching sun. The soldiers depend on you, but you're invisible to the generals planning their conquests. And you're starting to feel like the empire's forgotten backbone. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some camp women doubled as informal medics, using herbs like myrrh to treat minor wounds, a skill you're picking up as you bandage a soldier's scraped arm. You joke to yourself that you're the camp's secret healer, saving lives one leaf at a time. To bad the pays just a nod and a crust of bread. It's a small role, but it gives you a flicker of pride, even as you dodge the chaos of drunken soldiers and stray arrows. You think of that pomegranate juice you sipped during childbirth. Maybe you'll mix some for the next feverish recruit. Historians still argue whether camp followers like you had any real agency or were just exploited labor. Some say you could earn a bit of coin or favor by trading skills, while others argue you were at the mercy of the army's whims, vulnerable to violence or abandonment. You're feeling the vulnerability as you huddle near the fire, your veil pulled tight to avoid trouble. You think of Susa's concubines, with their silk-lined intrigues, and realize you'd trade their gilded cages for this dusty freedom. Except it's not really freedom, just a different kind of grind. You share a glance with another woman, her hands as rough as yours, as she kneads dough nearby. You whisper a joke, saying you'll both retire to Persepolis and open a flatbread empire. Her tired smile is a lifeline, like the nods from village widows or market women. These connections keep you going, even when the camp feels like a storm. You can't outrun. You're not alone, but you're exposed, with no walls or laws to shield you, and the weight of that sits heavy as you stir the stew. This life ties into everything you've faced. The legal system that silenced you offers. No protection here. Camp disputes are settled by fists or rank. The gossip that policed your village follows you, with soldiers, wives, whispering about loose women. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, with their purity rules, feel distant. You're too busy surviving to chant for Ahura Mazda. You think, back to the market, where you bartered in shadows, and the land you couldn't inherit, which pushed you to this nomadic life. You're still serving the empire, feeding its warriors. But you're as disposable as the embers in your fire. As night falls, you wrap your shawl tighter and portion out the stew, your hands steady despite the ache. You think of Persepolis, grand reliefs, Susa's glittering queens, and your village, where you wove and prayed. Here, in the camp's flickering light, you're carrying the same weight, keeping the army on the empire alive. You're not a hero, not even a name in the scribe's tablets, but you're here, stirring, mending, surviving. You set the pot down, wipe your brow, and brace for another dawn. Knowing your strength is the kind no one writes about, but everyone needs. You're gathered in a cramped courtyard, the air alive with the scent of blooming jasmine and the distant strum of lutes. But your heart's only half in it. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're celebrating Nowruz, the Persian New Year, but you're confined to the women's quarters, a world apart from the men's lavish feasts. The festival promises renewal, but for you, it's a reminder of the boundaries that box you in. Even during the empire's grandest holiday, you're adjusting your veil, trying to enjoy the moment. But the walls around you feel as solid as the rules you live by. Mainstream history tells us that Nowruz was a cornerstone of Achaemenid culture, a 13-day festival marking the spring equinox with feasts, gift-giving, and rituals for prosperity. The men are out there now, parading through the village, offering tributes to the local governor, while you're here with the other women, sharing plates of lentils and flatbread. You're not allowed in the public squares where the real parties happening. Your role is to prepare the food, pray for blessings, and keep the household's festive spirit alive behind closed doors. You're stirring a pot of sumac spiced rice, your hands moving on autopilot, wishing you could see the bonfires lighting up the night. Here's a quirky tidbit. Women sometimes made special Nowruz sweets, like chickpea cookies dyed with saffron, to share among themselves. You're nibbling one now, its crumbly sweetness a small joy, and you joke to yourself that if the men knew how good these were, they'd storm the women's quarters. The cookies are a tradition you love, a secret rebellion in sugar and spice. But they don't erase the fact that you're missing the festival's heart, the dancers, the music, the chance to feel like part of the empire's pulse. You're here, hidden, while the world celebrates beyond your reach. Historians still argue whether these gendered restrictions during festivals like Nowruz were about control or cultural balance. Some say separating women preserved notions of purity, while others argue it was just another way to keep you sidelined, your contributions vital but unseen. You're feeling sidelined as you hear laughter from the men's gathering, your cousin's voice rising above the rest. You think of Susa's queens, who might watch the festivities from palace balconies, but even they're not joining the parade. You're stuck in this courtyard. Your world shrunk to a few familiar faces and a table of modest dishes. You share a glance with your sister, who's braiding a girl's hair for the occasion. You whisper a joke, saying you'll sneak out dressed as a man to crash the bonfire party. Her giggle is a spark of light, like the shared laughs over henna disasters or market runs. The other women, mothers, aunts, neighbors are chatting, their voices weaving a warmth that softens the walls around you. You're not alone, and that's something, even if the festival's full splendor is a story you'll only hear secondhand. These women are your Nurus, their strength a quiet celebration of survival. The restrictions tie into everything you've faced. The legal system that silenced you keeps you from public roles in the festival. The gossip that polices your behavior is buzzing even now, with whispers about whose veil isn't festive enough. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, which you've performed for years, underpin this separation. Their purity rules drawing lines you can't cross. You think back to the military camp, where you toiled in shadows, and the market, where you bartered. Through proxies, Norus is the empire's heartbeat, but you're only allowed to feel its echo. Your labor and prayers fueling a party you can't join as you pass around another plate of cookies. You catch a glimpse of the stars through a gap in the courtyard wall. You think of Persepolis' grand feasts, Susa's gilded halls, and your village, where you've poured your life into every task. You're not dancing by the bonfires, but you're here, sharing sweets, keeping the spirit alive. You adjust your shawl, take another bite, and let the women's laughter fill the space. You're part of this empire, even if it keeps you in the shadows, and tonight you'll celebrate that strength. One cookie at a time. You're lying on a thin mat in your village home, the night air heavy with the scent of dust and worry, as a fever grips your body. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're seeking medical care, but the options are scarce, and your health feels like an afterthought in a world built for men. The room is dim, lit by a single oil lamp, and you're waiting for a healer who may or may not come. Your sister's pressing a damp cloth to your forehead, but you're starting to realize that being a woman means your pain is often ignored, left to the mercy of luck and whispered remedies. Mainstream history tells us that Achaemenid medicine was advanced for its time, blending herbal treatments with early surgical techniques, but it was mostly geared toward men soldiers, nobles, or kings. You're not a warrior with a spear wound. You're a woman with a fever, maybe from childbirth or overwork, and the local healer prioritizes the men's ailments. If you're lucky, you'll get a visit from an old woman skilled in herbs, but her knowledge is oral, passed down through generations, not written in the scribe's tablets. You're clutching a clay cup of willow bark tea, its bitter taste a faint hope, and wishing for the kind of care you've heard the royal court gets. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Persian healers used crushed garlic mixed with honey as a cure-all, slathered on wounds or swallowed for fevers. You're trying it now, wincing at the sticky mess, and you joke to yourself that if the fever doesn't kill you, the smell might scare the gods away. It's a small comfort, but you're clinging to it, remembering the pomegranate juice from childbirth or the myrrh you used in the military camp. These remedies are all you have, a patchwork of tradition in a system that barely sees your suffering. Historians still argue whether women's health was deliberately neglected or just underserved due to cultural blind spots. Some say elite women, had access to better healers, while others argue that even queens relied on the same hit or miss treatments as you. You're definitely feeling the miss as your fever spikes, your body aching like it's been hauling water jars all day. You think of Susa's palaces, where royal women might have attendants brewing tonics. But here, in the village, you're at the mercy of a healer who's probably busy with a merchant's cough. Your sister's eyes are worried, and you hate seeing her like this, but you're too weak to reassure her. You share a glance with her, and despite the haze, you whisper a joke, saying you'll haunt the healer if this garlic paste doesn't work. Her laugh is shaky, but it's a thread connecting you to the women who've kept you strong, village weavers, camp followers, Noru's cookie sharers. Their presence, even just in memory, is your real medicine, more potent than any herb. You're not alone, but you're scared, and the lack of care feels like another wall in a life full of them. You're fighting to breathe, to stay, and you're not ready to let this empire's neglect win. The scarcity of care ties into everything. The legal system that silenced you offers no recourse if the healer fails. The gossip that polices you might blame your illness on impurity, adding shame to pain. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, with their focus on purity, don't account for your body's needs. Your prayers are for the empire, not yourself. You think back to the market, where you couldn't barter for power, and the widowhood that left you scraping by. Your health is another thing the empire takes for granted, expecting you to labor, birth, and pray without breaking. But you're breaking now, and no one's rushing to help. As the lamp flickers, you sip more tea, your sister's, hands steady on yours. You think of Persepolis, bustling streets, Susa's glittering queens, and your village, where you've poured your strength into every task. You're not a noble, not even a name in the healer's tally, but you're here, fighting with the same grit that got you through childbirth and loss. The fever's a storm, but you're a survivor, and you're holding on, hoping the dawn brings relief, or at least another chance to keep going. You're sitting in the dim corner of your village home, the weight of a troubled marriage pressing heavier than the clay pot in your lap. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're staring down the near impossible path of divorce. A road so narrow and steep it might as well be a myth. The air smells of lentils simmering nearby, but your mind is on the arguments, the cold silences, and the life you're trapped in. You're wondering if there's a way out, but the empire's rules are a labyrinth, and for women like you, escape is a whisper, not a door. Mainstream history tells us that divorce in the Achaemenid Empire was rare and heavily skewed in men's favor. A man could cast you aside for disobedience or failure to bear sons with a nod from the local magistrate. You, on the other hand, have almost no grounds to leave abuse, neglect, or even infidelity barely count unless you've got powerful allies, which you don't. You're stuck. Your marriage, a contract etched in the empire's unyielding stone, and the thought of breaking it feels like trying to lift a palace pillar. You're kneading dough, your hands moving mechanically, while your heart churns with the what-ifs of a life you can't reach. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some rare cases, women could initiate a temporary separation if their husband was away for years, like on a military campaign, but it required a priest's blessing and a mountain of proof. You're picturing yourself pleading with a grumpy Zoroastrian priest, waving a clay tablet like it's a travel itinerary. You joke to yourself that you'd have better luck convincing the village goats to vouch for you. It's a faint glimmer of hope, but it's not helping now, as you face a husband who's more stranger than partner, and a society that expects you to endure. Historians still argue whether divorce was ever a real option for common women, or just a privilege for the elite. Some say royal women, like those in Susa, could negotiate separations through political leverage, while others insist that for you, a village woman, the system was a dead end, designed to keep families and property intact. You're feeling the dead end as you glance at the doorway, half expecting another argument. You think of the harem concubines, with their precarious lives, and realize even they might have more wiggle room than you, trading one cage for another. You're locked in, and the keys in someone else's hands. You catch your sister's eye as she sweeps the floor nearby, her face a mirror of your worry. You whisper a joke, saying you'll run off to join a caravan and become a desert poet. Her smile is thin, but it's a spark, like the shared laughs over Nowruz cookies or fevered nights. The other women in the village know you're strugglesome, have whispered their own tales of unhappy marriages, but no one speaks too loudly. Gossip, that ever-present shadow, could turn your pain into scandal, and you've had enough of its sting. You're not alone, but you're still trapped, and that truth sits heavy as you shape the dough. Divorce's rarity ties into every layer of your life. The legal system that silenced you in court offers no path to freedom here. The property you couldn't inherit keeps you dependent, with no land to fall back on if you leave. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, with their chants for harmony, seem to bind you to this marriage, as if the gods prefer order over your happiness. You think back to the marriage market, where you were bartered, and the childbirth that tied you. To this village, the empire expects you to hold the family together, no matter the cost, but you're cracking under the strain. As you set the dough to rise, you feel a flicker of defiance. You think of Persepolis' bustling markets, Susa's scheming queens, and your village, where you've survived loss and labor. You're not a noble with a royal exit, but you're not broken. You don't know if you'll stay, endure, or find a crack in this system, but you're not giving up. You wipe your hands, adjust your shawl, and step toward the fire, carrying the same strength that's gotten you this far. The path ahead is dark, but you're still walking, one stubborn step at a time. You're gliding through the perfumed corridors of a Susa palace, not as a concubine, but as a noblewoman, your silk robes whispering against polished stone. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're dipping into the world of elite women's intrigues, where power is a game of whispers, alliances, and carefully timed smiles. The air hums with rosewater and ambition, and you're navigating a maze of court politics where one wrong move could topple your family's status. You're not weaving wool or dodging gossip today, you're weaving plots, and the stakes are as high as the king's throne. Mainstream history tells us that Achaemenid noblewomen, like royal daughters or wives of satraps, could wield significant influence behind the scenes, often shaping succession or diplomacy. You're not Queen Atossa, but you're close enough to the inner circle to feel its heat. You're attending a banquet, your gold bangles clinking as you nod to a rival's compliment, knowing she's fishing for your next move. Your husband's away governing a province, so you're managing his alliances, passing messages through trusted servants, and keeping the palace's vipers at bay. It's not freedom, but it's power, and you're savoring its sharp edge. Here's a quirky tidbit. Noble women sometimes used scented oils, like myrrh, to signal their mood or status at court. Subtle, but deliberate. You're dabbing some on your wrists now, a floral code that says, approach with caution, and you joke to yourself that it's your secret weapon, more effective than a dagger. The other women notice, their eyes narrowing, and you feel a thrill, like outsmarting a market trader back in the village. This game is dangerous, but you're good at it, balancing charm and cunning like a liar's strings. Historians still argue whether these elite women were true power brokers or just proxies for men's agendas. Some say you could sway kings or secure your son's governorship, while others argue your influence was fragile, tied to your husband's status and easily lost. You're feeling the fragility as you overhear a rumor about a rival family's plot to discredit yours. You think of the harem concubines with their precarious lives, and realize even your silk robes don't shield you from betrayal. You're in the game, but the board could flip any moment, and you're playing to keep your head above water. You share a glance with a trusted ally, a cousin who's mastered the art of eavesdropping. You whisper a joke, saying you'll both write a court gossip scroll and sell it to the scribes. Her stifled laugh is a rare moment of trust, like the shared smirks with village women or camp followers. Here, allies are scarce, and every smile hides a motive, but you're not alone. You're leaning on the same strength that got you through village gossip and widowhood's grind. Even if it's cloaked in finer fabric now, you adjust your veil more for show than modesty and keep. Your eyes sharp. The intrigues tie into everything you've faced. The legal system that silenced common women bends slightly here, letting you pull strings through male proxies. The beauty standards that pinched your ears are now a battlefield, your painted face a mask of power. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, with their purity chants, shape this court, where divine order means keeping the right families on top. You think back to the marriage market, where you were a pawn, and the military camp, where you toiled unseen. Now, you're visible, but the empire's rules still bind you, just with a prettier knot. As the banquet unfolds, you sip pomegranate wine, your mind racing. You think of Persepolis, grand reliefs, Susa's glittering halls, and your village, where you first learned to survive. You're not a queen, but you're a player, weaving your family's future with every word. You don't know if you'll outmaneuver your rivals or fall to their schemes. But you're ready, your smile as sharp as the intrigues you're spinning. You set down your cup, nod to a passing noble, and step deeper into the game, carrying the same fire that's kept you alive through every challenge. You're in a remote village, far from the empire's bustling heart, the air thick with the scent of dry grass and solitude. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're living a life of rural isolation, where the nearest neighbor is a day's walk, and your days are a quiet grind of survival. You're hauling a water jar from a trickling stream, your back aching, and the silence is louder than any market's clamor. You're cut off from the world Persepolis, Susa. Even your old village feel like dreams, and you're learning that being a woman here means being invisible, even to yourself. Mainstream history tells us that the Achaemenid Empire spanned vast territories, but rural women like you were its unseen roots, sustaining remote outposts with endless labor. You're tending a small plot of barley, milking goats, and spinning wool by a flickering lamp, all while the empire's roads carry news and wealth to places you'll never see. Your husband, if he's still here, might trade at a distant market, but you're stuck. Your world shrunk to this patch of earth. You're kneading dough on a flat stone, your hands rough as the hills, and wondering if anyone beyond these mountains knows you exist. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some rural women kept beehives, bartering honey for rare goods like salt or iron. You're checking your own rickety hive now, dodging a stray bee, and you joke to yourself that your bees are better company than the village elder who visited last year. The honey's a small treasure, a sweet escape from the monotony, but it's not enough to bridge the gap between you and the empire's pulse. You think of the Nowruz cookies you shared in the village, a lifetime ago, and wish for that warmth, even just for a moment. Historians still argue whether rural isolation empowered women with independence or trapped them in loneliness. Some say you had more freedom without urban gossip or priests watching, while others argue the lack of community left you vulnerable with no one to lean on. You're feeling the vulnerability as you scan the horizon, hoping your husband returns with supplies before the barley runs out. You think of Susa's noble women, scheming in silk, and realize their intrigues are as far from your life as the stars. You're alone, and the weight of that presses harder than the water jar on your shoulder. You pause to rest, catching a faint song from a shepherd girl nearby, her voice carrying across the hills. You don't know her, but you hum along. A fleeting connection that feels like the shared glances with village weavers or camp followers. You whisper a joke, saying you'll both start a mountain choir and serenade the goats. It's a lonely laugh, but it keeps you grounded, like the memory of your sister's smile or the women who held you through childbirth. You're isolated, but you're not erased, and that stubborn spark keeps you moving. One task at a time. Isolation ties into everything you've faced. The legal system that silenced you is a distant rumor here, with no magistrate to hear your pleas. The gossip that policed you is gone, but so is the camaraderie of shared work. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, with their fire altars, are hard to maintain without a priest or temple. You pray alone, your words swallowed by the wind. You think back to the market, where you bartered in shadows, and the widowhood that pushed you to this edge of the empire. You're still serving, still surviving, but you're doing it in a void. As the sun dips, you set the water jar down and light your lamp, its glow a small defiance against the dark. You think of Persepolis grand markets, Susa's glittering courts, and your old village, where you wove and loved and lost. You're not a queen or a concubine, but you're here, tending your bees, your barley, your life. You don't know if anyone will ever know your name, but you know your strength, and that's enough to carry you through another quiet night, under a sky that feels both vast and close. You're in the heart of your village home, the air thick with the scent of simmering lentils and unspoken tension as you navigate the iron rule of your mother-in-law. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're under her watchful eye, a matriarch, who controls the household like a general, her word law in this cramped mud-brick world. You're grinding barley, her sharp gaze tracking your every move. And you're learning that her authority is a force as unyielding as the empire's own. You're trying to keep the peace, but her shadow looms, and you're feeling the weight of her expectations. Mainstream history tells us that in Achaemenid society, older women, especially mothers-in-law, often held significant sway within the household, acting as gatekeepers of tradition and resources. You're not just a wife or mother, you're her subordinate, expected to defer to her on everything from how much salt goes in the stew to how tightly you braid your daughter's hair. She's sitting across the courtyard, sorting figs, her voice cutting through the chatter as she corrects your grinding technique. You're biting your tongue, knowing a wrong word could spark a lecture longer than a Zoroastrian prayer, and you're already exhausted from her daily decrees. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some mothers-in-law were known to keep a household tally, scratching marks on a clay shard to track every jar of oil or loaf of bread. You're eyeing her now, wondering if she's tallying your barley output, and you joke to yourself that she'd probably count your breaths if she could. It's a small rebellion in your mind, but it keeps you sane as you grind faster, hoping to avoid another critique. You think of the honey you bartered in your rural days, wishing you could sweeten her mood with a spoonful. But you know better, she'd probably say you used too much. Historians still argue whether this matriarchal power gave women like her real influence, or just made them enforcers of the same patriarchal rules. Some say she's a rare example of female authority, managing the household's economy, while others argue she's just upholding the empire's order, keeping you in line. You're feeling the keeping in line part as she snaps at you for letting the fire die down. You think of Susa's noblewomen scheming in silk, and realize even they probably had a mother-in-law to appease. Her rule is your reality, and you're navigating it with the same caution you used in the marriage market or the gossip-filled village. You share a glance with your sister-in-law, who's scrubbing pots nearby, her eyes rolling at the latest edict. You whisper a joke, saying you'll carve a statue of Her Majesty, the mother-in-law, and pray to it for mercy. Her stifled giggle is a lifeline, like the shared laughs with camp followers or Noru's revelers. The other women in the household, your cousins, your niece, move quietly, all under her command. But you're not alone. You're leaning on the same strength that got you through widowhood and fever, even if it's just to survive another day of her reign. Her rule ties into everything you've faced. The legal system that silenced you mirrors her control. Your voice doesn't count here either. The gossip she wields, sharper than any village whisper, polices your every move. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, which she oversees with zeal, reinforce her authority, as if Ahura Mazda himself appointed her your judge. You think back to the military camp, where you toiled unseen, and the rural isolation, where you had no one to answer to. Here, you're answering to her, and it's a new kind of cage, one built from tradition and expectation. As you finish grinding, you set the barley aside, catching her grudging nod. You think of Persepolis' bustling markets, Susa's glittering intrigues, and your village, where you fought to carve out your space. You're not a queen or a rebel, but you're here, enduring her rule with the same grit that's carried you through every challenge. You don't know if you'll ever win her approval, but you know you'll keep going, one careful step at a time. You adjust your shawl, stoke the fire, and brace for her next command. Your strength a quiet fire she never fully tame. You're kneeling in the sunlit courtyard, your hands gently braiding your daughter's hair, but your mind is heavy with the weight of raising children in ancient Persia. As a woman, you're shaping the next generation under the empires. Strict expectations, where every lesson you teach modesty, obedience. Survival feels like a thread in a tapestry you didn't design. The air smells of warm bread and blooming oleander, but there's tension beneath the calm, a constant pressure to mold your children into the roles society demands. You're whispering a lullaby, but you're also steeling yourself for the battles ahead. Mainstream history tells us that child-rearing in the Achaemenid Empire was a gendered task, with mothers like you responsible for instilling cultural and religious values, especially in girls. Your daughter's only 6, but you're already teaching her to pin her veil and knead dough, preparing her for a life like yours, marriage, motherhood, and quiet endurance. Your son, meanwhile, is off with the men, learning to ride or tally grain, his path wider than hers. You're showing her how to grind barley now, her small hands clumsy, and you're torn between pride and dread, knowing the world she's growing into is as unforgiving as the one you've faced. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Persian mothers tied tiny amulets to their children's wrists, etched with prayers to ward off evil spirits. You're fastening one on your daughter now, its clay bead warm from your pocket, and you joke to yourself that it's her first piece of jewelry, better than those heavy earrings you wore for beauty's sake. It's a small ritual, but it gives you a flicker of control, a way to shield her from dangers you can't name. You think of the garlic paste you used for fever, hoping this charm works better than that sticky mess did. Historians still argue whether mothers had real influence over their children's futures or were just conduits for patriarchal norms. Some say you could shape their values, maybe nudge a daughter toward a kinder husband, while others argue you were enforcing the same rules that bound you, with no room to deviate. You're feeling the enforcement part as your mother-in-law hovers nearby, critiquing your daughter's posture. You want to teach her strength, not just submission, but the empire's expectations are a tide you can't swim against. You think of Susa's noblewomen raising heirs for power, and wish you could give your daughter their choices, not just their burdens. You share a glance with your sister, who's watching her own son play nearby. You whisper a joke, saying you'll teach your kids to run away and join a caravan of poets. Her laugh is soft, a reminder of the shared strength you've leaned on through gossip, fever, and widowhood. The other women in the village are raising their children too, their voices blending in the courtyard, a chorus of lullabies and warnings. You're not alone, but you're carrying the weight of your daughter's future, and it's heavier than the water jars you've hauled, child-rearing ties into everything you've endured. The legal system that silenced you means you can't secure her inheritance. The gossip that policed you will soon judge her every step. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, which you're teaching her to perform, bind her to purity and duty, just as they bound you. You think back to the marriage market, where you were bartered, and the rural isolation, where you had only yourself to rely on. Your daughter's life is already mapped out for loom. Autorand, you're torn between preparing her for it and wanting to rewrite the script as you finish her braid. You press a kiss to her forehead, her giggle a spark of light. You think of Persepolis, bustling markets, Susa scheming courts, and your village, where you fought to survive. You're not a queen or a rebel, but you're her mother, and you'll pour every ounce of your strength into her, even if the empire doesn't see it. You don't know if she'll face the same walls or find a way to climb them, but you know you'll teach her to keep going. You adjust her amulet, stand, and take her hand, ready to face the day's lessons, yours and hers. You're slipping through the narrow streets of your village, the morning sun casting long shadows as you clutch a basket of bread to deliver to a neighbor. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're navigating public spaces with the caution of a deer in a lion's den, your every step scrutinized by eyes you can't see. The air smells of dust and roasting sesame, but there's a tension beneath it. A reminder that public spaces are men's territory, and you're here on borrowed time. You're pulling your veil tighter, keeping your gaze low, and wishing you could move as freely as the boys darting past. Mainstream. History tells us that Achaemenid society was highly gendered, with public spaces, markets, squares, temples by men, while women were expected to stay home or move quickly when outside. You're not forbidden from the streets, but you're not welcome either. You're hurrying to avoid the stares of merchants or the gossip of loitering elders who might question why you're out alone. Your errand is simple trade, bread for oil, but it feels like a mission, each step calculated to avoid trouble. You're dodging a donkey cart, your sandals scuffing the dirt, and longing for the safety of your courtyard's walls. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women carried small, bronze mirrors to check their veils in public, ensuring no hair strayed to spark scandal. You're patting your veil now, wishing you had one of those mirrors, and you joke to yourself that you'd use it to reflect the sun into nosy neighbors' eyes. It's a fleeting laugh, but it steadies you as you weave through the crowd, your basket a shield against the world's judgment. You think of the henna patterns you tried for beauty, how they drew whispers. Out here, you're just trying to blend in, not stand out. Historians still argue whether these public limits were about control or cultural norms. Some say they protected women from harassment, while others argue they isolated you, cutting you off from the empire's pulse. You're feeling the isolation as a man barks at you to move faster, his tone sharp. You think of Susa's noblewomen, who might glide through palaces with escorts, but even they don't roam freely. You're in the open, but you're caged. Your presence tolerated only if you're quick, quiet, and covered. The street feels like a gauntlet, and you're running it with no applause. You catch a glance from another woman, her own basket tucked under her arm, her eyes mirroring your caution. You whisper a joke, muttering that you'll both race to the oil vendor and claim the street as yours. Her quick smile is a spark, like the shared laughs with your sister or the Nauru's cookie sharers. The other women out here in runas, water haulers move with the same wariness, a silent sisterhood bound by necessity. You're not alone, but you're exposed, and the weight of those unseen eyes presses harder than the basket in your hands. These limits tie into everything you've endured. The legal system that silenced you ensures no one defends your right to be here. The gossip that polices you thrives in these streets, ready to pounce on a slipped veil. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, with their purity rules, justify keeping you out of public life, as if your presence taints the order. You think back to the military camp, where you toiled unseen, and the marriage market, where your worth was bartered. The empire relies on your labor, your bread, your children, but it doesn't want you seen. Not here, not now. As you reach the vendor and barter your bread, you feel a flicker of triumph, small but real. You think of Persepolis, bustling, squares, Susa's gilded halls, and your village, where you fought to survive. You're not a queen or a rebel, but you're here, moving through a world that pushes you to the edges. You don't know if you'll ever walk these streets without fear, but you know you'll keep walking, one cautious step at a time. You tuck the oil jar under your arm, adjust your veil, and head home. Your strength a quiet defiance no stare can dim. You're crouched in the dim light of a village workshop, your hands shaping wet clay into a smooth, round pot, the air thick with the earthy scent of mud and sweat. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're an artisan, crafting pottery that'll hold grain or oil, but your work is hidden behind men's names, your skill unsettled. The world beyond this cramped room hums with trade and chatter, but you're focused on the wheel, spinning stories into clay while the empire takes credit for your craft. You're proud, but you're also tired of being a shadow in your own creation. Mainstream history tells us that Achaemenid artisans were vital to the empire's economy, producing everything from ceramics to textiles. But women like you were rarely acknowledged. You're skilled, your pots sturdy and etched with delicate patterns, yet when they're sold in the market, your brother or husband claims the title of potter. You're shaping another vessel now, your fingers steady despite the ache, knowing it'll end up in a noble's home, maybe even Susa, with no trace of your name. You're not just making pots, you're pouring your strength into the empire, one spin of the wheel at a time. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women, artisans, hid tiny symbols in their work, like a curled leaf or a star, as a secret signature. You're carving a small wave into this pot's rim, a mark only you'll know. And you joke to yourself that it's your way of shouting, "I was here," to future generations. It's a quiet rebellion, like the barley beer you brewed or the Nowruz cookies you shared, a way to claim a piece of this world that overlooks you. You think of the henna patterns you tried, another hidden art, and smile at the thought of leaving your mark, even if it's just in clay. Historians still argue whether women artisans had any real recognition or were entirely erased from the craft's story. Some say you could gain respect in the village for your skill, while others argue the system ensured men took the glory, leaving you to toil in obscurity. You're feeling the obscurity as you overhear a merchant praising your brother's fine pottery outside. You want to march out and set the record straight, but you keep spinning, knowing a woman's boast would spark gossip sharper than a shard. You think of the market where your pots are sold, and the noble women of Susa who'll never know the hands that shaped their jars. You share a glance with another woman nearby, her own wheel humming as she shapes a bowl. You whisper a joke, saying you'll both sneak your pots into the king's palace and demand a royal title. Her chuckle is a spark, like the shared laughs with your sister or the women in the military camp. The workshop is a small world of women potters, weavers, dyers, all crafting in the shadows, your hands building the empire's wealth while your names fade. You're not alone, and that bond, quiet as it is, keeps you steady through the long hours. Your hidden role ties into everything you faced. The legal system that silenced you ensures you can't claim your work's profits. The gossip that polices you would frown on a woman boasting of her craft. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, with their focus on order, seem to justify keeping you out of the spotlight, as if your skill disrupts the divine plan. You think back to the public streets, where you moved cautiously, and the mother-in-law who ruled your home, another force dimming your light. Your pots hold the empire's grain, but you're invisible. Your art a gift you're not allowed to sign. As you finish the pot, you set it to dry, your wave symbol glinting in the lamplight. You think of Persepolis bustling, markets, Susa's glittering courts, and your village, where you've poured your heart into every task. You're not a queen or a merchant, but you're an artisan, your hands telling a story the empire won't hear. You don't know if anyone will ever find your symbols, but you know they're there, and that's enough for now. You wipe your hands, adjust your shawl, and start another pot, your strength etched into every curve, as enduring as the clay itself. You're crouched in a dim corner of a noble's estate. Your hands raw from scrubbing floors, the air heavy with the scent of dust and servitude. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're enslaved, stripped of freedom and tethered to the whims of your master's household. Your life is a cycle of grueling tasks, cleaning, fetching, enduring while the empire's grandeur hums beyond your reach. You're invisible, yet essential, and you're learning that survival here means swallowing your pride and guarding your spark. Even as the chains weigh you down, mainstream history tells us that slavery was a cornerstone of the Achaemenid economy, with enslaved women like you working in households, fields, or workshops across the empire. You might have been born into this, captured in a distant war, or sold to settle a debt. Either way, your property, your days dictated by a mistress who barks orders from her cushioned seat. You're hauling water now, the jars wait, biting into your shoulder, while the noble's daughters laugh nearby, their silk robes a world apart from your rough tunic. You're not a person to them, just a pair of hands, and the sting of that cuts deeper than the labor. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some enslaved women were taught to weave intricate patterns, their textiles prized in markets, though the profits never touched their hands. You're no weaver, but you've seen those women, their fingers dancing despite their chains. And you joke to yourself that you'd weave a rug to trip your mistress if you had the chance. It's a fleeting laugh, a way to keep your spirit from breaking, like the clay symbols you admired in the potter's workshop. You think of the barley beer you once brewed in a freer life, wishing for a sip to dull the ache. Historians still argue whether enslaved women had any agency or were utterly powerless. Some say you could earn small favors, straw food, a lighter task through skill or cunning, while others argue your life was a void of choice, every moment owned. You're feeling the void as you scrub, your mistress's voice sharp because a speck of dust dared linger. You think of Susa's noblewomen, scheming in luxury, and the village artisans whose hidden marks you envied. You're lower than them all, but you're still here. Your will a ember no one can douse, even if they try. You share a glance with another enslaved woman, her own bucket sloshing as she mops nearby. You whisper a joke, saying you'll both steal the mistress's earrings and sail to Egypt. Her quick nod is a lifeline, like the shared smiles with village weavers or camp followers. You're not friends, trust is a luxury, but you're bound by the same grind, the same silent fight to endure. You're not alone, and that connection, fragile as it is, keeps you moving, even when your body screams to stop. You're leaning on the same strength that got you through fever and loss, though it's harder to find now. Slavery ties into every layer of your past. The legal system that silenced free women is a distant dream. You have no rights at all. The gossip that policed you is now your mistress's weapon, her complaints shaping your punishment. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, with their purity chants, mark you as impure, unfit for the altar you once tended. You think back to the public streets, where you moved cautiously, and the mother-in-law who ruled your home, a softer cage than this. The empire thrives on your labor. You're scrubbing, you're fetching, but it's built to crush you, and you're fighting to hold on to yourself. As you finish the floor, you pause, your hands trembling from the work. You think of Persepolis, grand palaces, Susa's glittering courts, and your lost village, where you wove and prayed. You're not a queen, not even a free woman, but you're here, carrying a strength no chain can break. You don't know if you'll ever taste freedom, but you know you'll keep going, one stolen breath at a time. You set the bucket down, wipe your brow, and brace for the next task. Your heart a quiet rebellion against a world that calls you nothing. You're standing in the dusty courtyard of your village home, watching your brothers divide a small pile of grain and tools, their voices low but firm. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're witnessing the harsh reality of inheritance, where the empire's wealth flows to men, leaving you empty-handed. Your father's recent death has sparked this division, and you're learning that the land and goods you helped sustain are slipping through your fingers, reserved for your brothers. Names. The air smells of dry earth and loss, and you're grappling with a system that erases your stake in the family you fought for. Mainstream history tells us that Achaemenid inheritance laws were strictly patrilineal, channeling livestock, even debts due male heirs to preserve family power. As a daughter or widow, you're entitled to nothing unless a rare exception, like a dowry, was set aside. Your brothers are sorting the barley fields and goats you tended alongside them, but you're a bystander, your labor irrelevant to the clay tablets they'll mark with their names. You're clutching a woven shawl, its threads a reminder of your work, and feeling the sting of being written out of your own story, as if you were never here. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some cases, women could receive maintenance from the family estate, like a monthly ration of grain, but only if the male heirs agreed. You're imagining yourself begging your brothers for a handful of barley, and you joke to yourself that you'd rather trade your shawl for a goat and call it your empire. It's a bitter laugh, but it keeps you from crumbling as you watch them haggle over the best field. You think of the honey you bartered in rural isolation, a small win compared to this loss, and wish you could trade your way out of this moment. Historians still argue whether women ever inherited under special circumstances, or if the system was ironclad. Some say elite women, like royal widows, could control estates as regents for young sons, while others insist commoners like you were always excluded, left to rely on charity or marriage. You're feeling the exclusion as your eldest brother claims the house you've cleaned and cooked in for years. You think of Susa's noblewomen with their gilded intrigues, and the enslaved women scrubbing floors, both worlds where property was a man's game. You're neither, just a village woman, and the empire's rules have no mercy for you. You catch a glance from your sister, standing nearby with her own clenched fists. You whisper a joke, saying you'll both steal the goats and start a herd. In the hills, her quick nod is a spark, like the shared laughs with artisans or camp followers. The other women in the village widow's daughters know this pain, their own inheritances lost to brothers or cousins. You're not alone, but you're powerless, and the weight of that sits heavier than the water jars you've carried. You're leaning on the same strength that got you through gossip and slavery, but it's a quiet fight now, one you're not sure you can win. Inheritances male tilt ties into every layer of your life. The legal system that silenced you ensures you can't claim your share. The gossip that policed you now whispers about your failure to secure a future. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, with their chants for order, seem to bless this division, as if the gods preferred men's hands-on. The land, you think back to the public streets, where you moved cautiously, and the pottery you shaped. Its secret marks your only legacy. The empire thrives on your work, your fields, your children, but it hands you nothing, expecting you to fade into someone else's story as your brothers finish. You turn back to the loom, your fingers threading wool with a familiar rhythm. You think of Persepolis, bustling markets, Susa's glittering courts, and your village, where you've poured your heart into every task. You're not an heir, not even a name on their tablets, but you're here, weaving a life from scraps. You don't know if you'll find a way to survive this, maybe through bartering, maybe through stubbornness, but you know you'll try. You adjust your shawl, set the looms, shuttle, and keep going, your strength a quiet claim to a legacy no one can take. You're standing at the edge of your village, the royal road stretching into the dusty horizon, its promise of far-off lands as tempting as it is forbidden. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're facing the barriers that keep you from traveling. A world of movement and adventure reserved for men. The air smells of sage and distant rain, but you're grounded, your life tethered to this patch of earth, while caravans carry stories you'll never live. You're clutching a basket of dried herbs, meant for a neighbor, but your heart's wandering, and you're learning that being a woman means dreaming of roads you can't walk. Mainstream history tells us that the Achaemenid Empire's royal road was a marvel, spanning over 1,500 miles, with couriers and traders linking Susa to Sardis. Men merchants, soldiers, messengers, roam freely, their tales of Babylon or Egypt filling the village air. You, however, can't just pack a sack and go. Travel requires a male guardian, a purpose deemed worthy, and resources you don't have. You're imagining joining a caravan, your veil flapping in the wind. But the reality is you're stuck, delivering herbs while your brother plans a trade trip. You're part of the empire's heartbeat, but you're not allowed to follow its veins. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women, usually widows or camp followers, tagged along on military marches, but only as support, not explorers. You're picturing yourself sneaking onto a caravan as a cook, dishing out lentils with a side of adventure. You joke to yourself that you'd barter your herb basket for a camel and race to Persepolis before anyone noticed. It's a fleeting fantasy, like the clay symbols you admired in pottery or the amulet you tied on your daughter. You think of the honey you once traded in isolation, wishing you could swap it for a ticket to anywhere. Historians still argue whether travel restrictions were about protecting women or controlling them. Some say they shielded you from road dangers, while others argue they caged you, ensuring you stayed in your roll home, loom, altar. You're feeling the cage as you watch a caravan's dust cloud fade, your feet rooted to the village's edge. You think of Susa's noblewomen, who might travel with escorts, but even they're bound by protocol. You're free to dream, but the road's a man's world, and the empire's rules keep you from stepping onto it, just like they kept you from markets or courts. You share a glance with a neighbor woman, her own eyes tracking the caravan's trail. You whisper a joke, saying you'll both stow away in a spice sack and see the sea. Her soft laugh is a spark, like the shared smirks with artisans or enslaved women. The village women, mothers, widows, weavers, know this longing, their own dreams, clipped by the same rules. You're not alone, but you're stranded, and the weight of that presses harder than the basket in your arms. You're leaning on the same strength that got you through inheritance's sting and public scrutiny. But it's a quiet ache now. A road untravels, barriers tie into every layer of your life. The legal system that silenced you offers no passport for women. The gossip that policed you would brand a traveling woman as reckless. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, with their purity chants, suggest the road's impurity is no place for you. You think back to the military camp, where you followed but didn't lead, and the inheritance you couldn't claim, which left you no means to wander. The empire thrives on movement, its roads, its trade, but it expects you to stay still. Your labor anchoring the home while others roam. As you turn back to the village, you set the basket down for a moment, your gaze lingering on the horizon. You think of Persepolis, bustling markets, Susa's glittering courts, and your village, where you've poured your strength into every task. You're not a merchant or a courier, but you're here, carrying dreams no roadblock can steal. You don't know if you'll ever see beyond these hills, but you know you'll keep dreaming, one stubborn step at a time. You pick up the basket, adjust your shawl, and head home, your heart a map of places you've yet to go. You're sitting on a worn mat in your village home, the evening light filtering through a cracked window, casting soft shadows on your weathered hands. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're aging, your body slower, but your spirit still sharp. Yet you're fading from the empire's gaze. The air smells of cooling earth and faint rosemary. But there's a quiet ache in your chest as you realize society has little use for older women like you. You're mending a grandchild's tunic, your fingers steady, but you're grappling with a world that's pushing you to the edges. Your value dimming like the day's last light. Mainstream history tells us that. Achaemenid society revered age in men. Elders were advisors. Their beards a badge of wisdom, but older women were often sidelined, their roles shrinking to grandmothers or silent matriarchs. You're no longer weaving for trade or hauling water. Those tasks fall to younger hands. Your throne, once a force, has passed to your daughter-in-law, and you're now a background figure, expected to offer advice, but not authority. You're stitching carefully, each thread a memory of the fields you worked, the children you raised, and you're wondering where your place is in a village that's moving on without you. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some older women became storytellers, weaving oral histories into lullabies for grandchildren, a way to preserve their voice. You're humming one now, a tale of Anahita's river, and you joke to yourself that you're the village's unofficial bard, minus the lyre. It's a small joy, like the clay symbols you admired in pottery or the honey you traded in isolation. A way to leave a mark when the Empire's tablets ignore you. You think of the Norus cookies you once shared, wishing you could still stir up that sweetness. But your hands are better at mending than mixing now. Historians still argue whether aging women held quiet influence or were simply discarded by society. Some say your wisdom shaped family decisions, while others argue you were invisible. Your contributions buried under youth's shine. You're feeling the invisibility as your grandson runs past, barely noticing you. You think of Susa's noblewomen, whose status might cushion their age, and the enslaved women whose labor never stopped. You're neither, just a village woman, and the Empire's gaze has shifted, leaving you to find meaning in the small acts like this tunic, or a story told under the stars. You share a glance with an older neighbor, her own hands busy with a basket of wool. You whisper a joke, saying you'll both start a grey-haired rebellion and take over the village council. Her soft chuckle is a spark, like the shared laughs with weavers or camp followers. The other older women, widows, grandmothers move. Quietly, their presence a soft thread in the villages we've. You're not alone, but you're fading, and the weight of that sits heavier than the years. You're leaning on the same strength that got you through inheritance's sting and travel's barriers. But it's a gentler fight now, one of holding onto yourself. Aging social drop ties into every layer of your life. The legal system that silenced you offers no status for your years. The gossip that policed you now dismisses you as irrelevant. Even the Zoroastrian rituals, with their purity chants, seem to favor the young, as if your prayers carry less weight. You think back to the public streets, where you moved cautiously, and the children you raised, now grown and busy. The Empire relied on your labor, your looms, your prayers, but it's ready to forget you, expecting you to slip into silence without complaint. As you finish the tunic, you fold it neatly, your hands tracing the stitches like a map of your life. You think of Persepolis' bustling markets, Susa's glittering courts, and your village, where you've poured your strength into every task. You're not a queen or a matriarch, but you're here, mending, humming, existing. You don't know if the village will remember your stories, but you know they're yours, and that's enough for now. You set the tunic aside, adjust your shawl, and lean back, your heart a quiet flame that still burns, even as the world looks away. You're sitting by the embers of a small fire in your village courtyard, the night air soft with the scent of jasmine and the distant hum of crickets. As a woman in ancient Persia, you're reflecting on the legacy of resilience you've carried through a life of labor, loss, and quiet defiance. Your hands, worn from decades of weaving, grinding, and mending, rest in your lap. And you're tracing the arc of your story, not one of glory, but of strength that held the empire together. even if no scribe ever wrote your name. You're old now, but your spirit's still a spark, and you're ready to pass it on. Mainstream history tells us that Achaemenid women, from queens to commoners, were the unseen scaffolding of the empire. Their work, childbirth, crafts, prayers, foundation. You're no Atosa, scheming in Susa's palaces. But you've shaped this village with every loaf baked, every pot thrown, every child raised. You're thinking of your daughter, now a mother herself, and the lessons you've taught her. Not just how to pin a veil, but how to stand tall when the world pushes you down. You're stirring the fire's ashes, your eyes on the stars, and feeling a quiet pride in the life you've built, even if it's etched in clay, not stone. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women left oral legacies, weaving their lives into stories told at family fires, outlasting any tablet. You're crafting one now, a tale of the time you outsmarted a market trader with your barley beer, and you joke to yourself that it's better than any king's epic. It's a small act, like the wave you carved in a pot or the amulet you tied on your daughter, but it's yours, a thread of defiance against a world that tried to erase you. You think of the Nowruz cookies, their sweetness a memory of shared joy, and hope your stories carry that warmth forward. Historians still argue whether women's resilience was a quiet rebellion or just survival under oppression. Some say you changed the empire's course through your endurance, while others argue you were forced to bear its weight without reward. You're feeling both as you recall the legal system that silenced you, the gossip that judged you, and the roads you couldn't travel. You think of the enslaved women, the artisans, the noble women, all bound by different chains, all carrying the same fire. You're not sure if you rebelled or just survived, but you know you're still here, and that's a victory no one can take. You share a glance with your granddaughter, curled nearby, her eyes half closed as she listens to your tale. You whisper a joke, saying you'll teach her to brew beer and conquer the village. Her sleepy giggle is a spark, like the shared laughs with your sister, the camp followers, or the aging women mending by lamplight. You're not alone, and this connection across generations, across struggles, is your true legacy, stronger than any land or title. You're leaning on the same strength that got you through widowhood, fever, and a mother-in-law's rule. And now you're giving it away, one story at a time. Your resilience ties into every layer of your life. The Zoroastrian rituals, with their chants for order, gave you purpose, even as they bound you. The children you raised carry your lessons, even if they don't know it. The empire you served its fields, its pots, its altar stands, because of you, even if it never said thank you. You think back to Persepolis markets, Susa's courts, and your village, where you fought to exist. You're not a queen, but you're a cornerstone, and as you sit by this fire, you feel the weight of that truth settle, warm and solid. As the fire dies, your voice softens, the words slower now, each one a gentle step toward rest. The stars are bright above, and you imagine them as the sparks of every woman who came before you, their strength lighting your path. You're not afraid of fading. You've left your mark in your daughter's courage, your granddaughter's laugh, the stories that'll outlive you. The village sleeps around you, its rhythm a lullaby, and you feel a deep peace, like the cool of a stream after a long day's work. You pull your shawl closer, your breath steady, and let the night cradle you, knowing you've carried more than your share, and carried it well. Your eyes drift shut, the fire's last glow a whisper of warmth, guiding you into dreams where no walls hold you back. where your strength shines as bright as the stars.